Welcome to the Nevada Virtual Museum, a local establishment known for standing out from its surroundings. As its bright banner states, the museum has recently opened a new exhibit. We will be taking a tour of it today. Let's head inside. South Africa predominantly was a country inhabited by colored people, but in the 1800s, a good portion of South Africa's population consisted of white South Africans who were descendants of the British and Dutch that ruled much of the continent of Africa in that period of time. Before and well into the 1800s, white supremacy was a popular concept all across the map to those with the white skin who could wield it. And in South Africa, where many Indians traveled in hopes of finding work, the heavy discrimination based on skin color was definitely there. As well as being subject to the constant discrimination, Indians were denied basic political rights. They could be arrested simply for walking on the same sidewalk as a white person, and unless they were Christian, their marriages were not recognized. Not only that, but after the Indians had aided Britain in World War I, the British government had promised reforms and greater self-rule for Indians, but after the war, no such changes were made. In response to this absurd separation of race and denial of rights, Mohandas Gandhi, a young Indian lawyer who was living in South Africa at the time, organized rallies and protests, wrote letters to newspapers, and challenged the unjust laws in court. When the injustices continued without any interaction from the government, Gandhi encouraged his fellow Indians to disobey the unjust laws while remaining quiet and not returning the violence being acted upon them, an act of opposition known as nonviolent resistance. Indians refused to pay British taxes, ceased interaction with British schools and courts and other institutions, and they boycotted British-made products. For all of their defying acts, British officials arrested Gandhi and tens of thousands of his supporters, and in doing so brought worldwide attention to the discrimination occurring there. Finally, in 1935, the British Parliament granted Indians limited self-rule that would lead to India becoming an independent, self-governing nation. In the time following the Cold War, the United States economy was booming. Businesses were doing better than ever, cranking out automobiles, appliances, and whatever else Americans could possibly want. Everything seemed like it was going great. But beneath the surface, heavy discrimination was at play. African Americans were rejected by employers, and most of the suburban housing developments built during the time refused to sell homes to them. Schools across the South began to segregate those with brown skin, and even professional sports and entertainment industries began to shut the blacks out. In response, bold leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. spoke out for equal rights for all, and the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional, but still the discrimination continued. King led his fellow African Americans in acts of boycotting segregationist policies, and he acted against discrimination in public facilities, jobs, housing, and voting rights. He won support from whites as well as blacks, but the discrimination continued. In 1964 and 1965, President Lyndon Johnson pushed Congress to pass the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts, making discrimination illegal. But still, it continues. In the beginning of the reign of the Tokugawa shogunate in Japan, there existed a seemingly irrevocable hierarchy among the people. The emperor was at the very top, ruling over his people with status instead of power. Then came the shogun and the daimyo, with military might that secured them authority and respect. Then came the samurai, the peasants, the artisans, and last of all, the merchants. And so the social ladder would remain for years and years to come. But it was thanks to the basic peasant food sellers, the crafting artisans, and the merchants with their miscellaneous goods that the early Tokugawa period saw exponential economic growth, occurring first in the agricultural sector, then in the merchant-driven trade and market activity. This growth set a change into motion that reversed the hierarchy completely. The ruling class was prevented from taking advantage of economic growth, the samurai were forbidden from engaging in profitable trade or farming, and they steadily became economically weaker. And substantial benefits went to merchants and even to market-savvy peasants. As a result, an increasingly wealthy, educated, and powerful commoner population rose from the ashes they had been forced to call home. World War I was a vicious clash between two significant alliances: the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, and the Allied Powers, Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, the United States, and many more. What started as a comparison of military might quickly became something ugly. As rebellion struck and allies had to live up to their promises, each opposing side was giving the war everything they had. Worldwide, economies began to suffer and lands were left in ruins. Millions of lives were taken by trench warfare, explosive shells, and poisonous gases, and Germany and Russia experienced staggering death rates with about 1.7 million dead each. The world had never seen such turmoil before. Eventually, it came to an end with armistices and treaties alike, and it was now time to attempt to put the world back together again by placing and accepting blame where it was due. But everything didn't fall into place with the treaty to end all treaties, the Treaty of Versailles, as the authorities had hoped it would. For starters, when representatives from numerous countries gathered to discuss the post-war reparations, Germany and its allies were not present, for they had not been invited. And as the negotiation unfolded, all fingers turned to Germany in blame. In the end, Germany was stripped of its overseas colonies and many of its borderlands. Germany was required to pay large reparations to other countries for the damage that had been done, though every country involved had put in just as much effort and done just as much damage as they had, and the German army was greatly reduced. This stirred up a spirit of militant nationalism in the Germans, and they longed for revenge on their World War I enemies, a longing that paved the way for World War II. The Great Depression was one of the greatest economic catastrophes that has ever occurred. The stock market crashed and left millions of people bankrupt, unemployed, and homeless as banks, factories, and businesses closed, and trade all across the world came to a sudden halt. It is still debated by historians and economists today how the event occurred exactly, but one of the main causes is obvious: unequal income. In the United States, during a period known as the Roaring Twenties, the economy had reached a high peak. The nation's income rose, various devices and goods were produced at an astounding rate, and stores began to offer buy now, pay later options that made the middle class cheer. But oncoming problems were hiding in plain sight. The new concept of credit and paying for things in installments allowed manufacturers to make great profit, but instead of investing it in new machinery or workers' wages, a good portion of business owners put their profit into their own bank accounts, and the wealth of the nation became concentrated to only 5% of the population. An astounding 40% of the population now struggled just to get by, and the lack of equally distributed income resulted in people being unable to afford the products these businesses made, which directly led to a large amount of the unemployment that sent the world into chaos. Thank you for visiting the Nevada Virtual Museum's new exhibit, Inequality and Its Consequences. We hope some of the exhibit's components have made you more aware and that you enjoyed your visit.